So I'd love to start today's conversation talking about your time working at PlayStation. What were you focused on when you worked there?
Yeah, I mean, PlayStation was fun. It was my role there was an interesting one because the way that PlayStation structures product marketing, product management actually mirrors like what brand management looks like in CPG companies in the sense that I actually like had full kind of end-to-end P&L responsibility. It was responsible for kind of like both product planning and like kind of longer range franchise planning for the games that I worked on, as well as the actual full end-to-end marketing campaign structure. So, all the way through launch and post-launch, I was doing kind of sales strategy for, enabling our channel sales motion. I was doing integrated campaign planning for the actual launch itself and managing all of our agency relationships and media buying. So it was like a big chunky role doing a whole bunch of stuff, basically overseeing specific products. And so I was working on like God of War, Gran Turismo, a bunch of like fun games while I was there.
And so how does that work? Because you're not actually making the games, right? So you're maybe not a product manager in that traditional sense, but then you're talking to the game makers, and then at some point they sort of hand off the process to you to commercialize it. Like how early in that process did you sort of get involved?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's definitely not quite the same as like product management in tech companies where you're actually like working directly with engineering on, like writing out user stories and actually building the product itself. But it was like we were involved at the earliest stages. So it's kind of like a funky publisher studio relationship where we were actually like at the very earliest stages of a game gets even concepted, and we would be involved in the green light process, basically doing like market sizing, trying to identify like, okay, how much demand like is there potentially for this concept, doing a lot of like early focus groups to identify, like what that product should look like, like for example, when launching, kind of I actually didn't work on the more recent God of War franchises, but like a lot of the research done to inform like, oh, that should be set in, Viking days instead of set in ancient Greece. Like that happened in some of the research that we were doing for God of War Ascension, which I worked on. So, it's like you're looking years and years out and doing, what I would categorize as like much more true product management, where you're actually doing like really business planning for the product you're building.
Super interesting. I'd love to kind of go behind the scenes of one of these launches. I don't know if God of War is a good example or if there's another one, but so you do all this research, you're working with the developers. At some point, there's a game that's getting close to being finished. Like, what happens next? How does that kind of commercialization process start, and what does that even look like?
Yeah, I mean, gaming's interesting again because like it's so launch heavy as a culture, right? It's like 90% of your sales happen in the first 60 to 90 days of the game launching, and so basically like getting the launch right is almost life and death for the product, and so much of the marketing and all the promotion that you're doing is happening before the game actually ever even releases, and it's all about just building demand up front so that when it does release, it becomes a kind of cultural moment, which can then, have some legs of its own to run with instead of you just having to go like acquire new buyers for every single copy of the game. So, the commercialization process is really chunky. Upfront, you're doing a ton of like financial analysis and long range planning on, kind of what the overall positioning, pricing strategy, what product you need to build. So, like, all of the commercial planning around what like add-ons are you selling alongside the core game, and how are you structuring pricing packages for that? What like early offers are you giving to, beta users that are going to incentivize them to use the beta because you need to get product feedback before the thing's actually ready for prime time? How are you structuring the beta as a promotional vehicle for the larger game? There's just all this chunky work that happens before you even get to the stage of like the campaign itself. And then you basically have, a launch campaign where it kind of breaks out into a couple of different phases where you kind of have the initial announce of the game and like, revealing that it's going to even exist at some point to the world, followed by, like some kind of lighter weight nurturing to make sure that people don't forget about you between that announcement to, when you actually start the meat of the campaign, which is really like the short window kind of leading into launch. You're really doing like big TV advertising, events. There's tons of digital advertising as well. I mean, this was like back in the days when Facebook and Google advertising were just starting to emerge and they didn't really exist yet. So we were really like TV events heavy and a lot of like PR and comms work. That's kind of shifted, I think, in recent years to be a little bit more of a mix. But it's a big meaty process. I could spend 2 hours going through like the giant 10,000 step checklist that we had to get all the packaging done, get all the packaging in the hands of all the partners that needed it in order to get it live in retail storefronts, in order to enable support. It's just thinking about every single little piece of the business and businesses around the business and how that launch is going to impact them, and making sure they're all like enabled to actually talk about the product effectively.
Super interesting. And yeah, as you're talking, it makes sense. It's just a lot of like brand advertising, essentially, like big mass market, get this game in front of a lot of people. But then there's all those weird little distribution partnerships. Like I assume GameStop was one that you have to figure out what is our strategy with them and how do you actually sell through those channels. Yeah, very interesting. Very different than what we're up to now in SaaS.
Yeah, I think it's the truest form of marketing, in the sense that like you are really thinking about this thing as like an integrated campaign and a system, all the way from like the very top level awareness activity that you're doing down through, how are you actually converting those people at the digital level? How are you then getting them like to engage with and evangelize the product, which involves a lot of like, stuff that looks like pre-tech, growth loops, and building out like in-product virality and building out community engagement activities around the product. And so a lot of the tactics actually, like, it's funny, like I've gone through interviews in the past and people are like, oh, I don't really want to hear about your gaming experience because we're hiring for a SaaS marketing role. And I'm like, yeah, but like the gaming experience that I have is probably more applicable to this than a lot of SaaS experience out there.
Yeah, no, it makes you a well-rounded marketer. I mean, I think I used to do a lot of these big integrated campaigns for Google when I was a consultant for them, and it gave me a lens of how do you structure a campaign with the air cover. And I always think of it like war is my example. It's like you want to have the air cover, then you want to have the troops on the ground like fighting, and you need to think through, okay, what are the different channels? How do you reach people? Because if you just invest into one little channel, you might get some, fruit from that, but like it really works better when you're hitting people from all these different angles. And I think that applies like no matter the product you're trying to market.
And also crafting journeys that actually extend all the way through those angles. Like when we were building TV spots, we would have to target Google advertising around the language that we assumed and had researched that customers would be searching for coming out of that TV spot, rather than just like think about search for our product holistically. It was like, okay, there's going to be some other things that people are going to search for adjacently that come out from our TV creative. And we need to think about how we convert those people through a funnel.
Yeah. And it must have been really fun having just a giant budget too. I think that's one of the fun things about these big companies.